Now we have to move to Dr. Rahul Malhotra, and her topic today is on the panel on health and aging of Singaporean elderly, face data overview and access to data. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Prof. Vivian. Let me just share my slides. Yeah, thanks a lot. Welcome everyone this morning for this, or evening, I guess, for those of you who are joining from the West, and a morning to those who are on the eastern side of the world, I guess. So I'll be talking about the panel on aging, on health and aging of Singaporean elderly, phase for short, providing a brief overview, and then how to get maybe access to data for those of you who may be interested in analyzing the data for your own research, academic and policy purposes. So I'm Rahul Malhotra. I'm at the Center for Aging Research and Education and Health Services and Systems Research at the Duke NUS Medical School in Singapore. Before I talk about the study per se, I mean, just kind of the context in which we are studying kind of aging in Singapore. Just briefly about Singapore, it's a small, I guess, city-state island nation, just south of peninsular Malaysia, in Southeast Asia. It's small compared to many of the Southeast Asian countries. It's only around 728 square kilometers or 281 square miles, but it's densely populated. The total population in 2021, the mid-year estimates were around 5.45 million, with around 4 million residents and the rest being comprised of non-residents. It's a densely populated state, and most individuals in Singapore would live in high rises like the ones that you see in the pictures on your screen. And the population density is around 7,485 persons per square kilometer. So immensely densely populated. People mostly live in high rise housing in Singapore, and that includes older people. The prevalence of the proportion of people living in nursing homes, I guess, in Singapore, older people, is very low. I would put it at less than 5%. So most people live at home, being cared at home in Singapore. What does the older population in Singapore look like? So we have around 1.25 million older people in Singapore, which was predicted to increase to around 2.6 million by 2050. Of course, these absolute numbers look much less compared to many other countries around the world, where the absolute number of older people is much higher. But when we look at the relative numbers, that's where I guess the story starts unfolding, where we see that currently 1 in 5 persons in Singapore are age 60 years and above, and that is nearly going to touch 1 in 2 by the middle of this century. And that is something that keeps the policymakers awake, as well as researchers like us, thinking about how to kind of optimize aging in Singapore, and how not to kind of maybe how not to consider aging as a bane, but rather a boon that can be used such that older people remain productive and active as they continue to age. I think what has also kind of been driving the whole policy and research focus on aging in Singapore is not just that there will be a lot of older people in Singapore, but the speed at which population has aged. I mean, just to bring home that fact, if we compare the proportion of older individuals aged 65 years and above between Singapore, Japan, and USA, we see that although Singapore had been languishing in this proportion for a long time, but it has just taken off exponentially since 2010, and it has and the time that it has taken to cross between an aged nation and a super aged nation is much less compared to the time that it took the US or Japan, or would take US and Japan, to cross these threshold. Another kind of figure that really helps home drive the fact is that these are two population pyramids for Singapore within a 10-year interval. And we see that there is a sharp contraction of the base and an expansion of the top, even within a decade. I think in many other countries, you would have to wait maybe for 3 or 4 decades to see, or even a century to see that kind of change in the population pyramid that Singapore has experienced in just a decade. Right. And of course, the contributors are, as in other parts of the world, increasing life expectancy, given the dramatic kind of public health and clinical improvements in Singapore, but also I think the decrease in the in total fertility rate that has been below the replacement level since the late 1970s, and in fact is now close to around 1. I mean, something that's interesting is that you would see, I guess, in many kind of Asian nations where the Chinese zodiac calendar is followed, is this decline, that sharp decline that even occurs even within this low decline fertility rate in the year of the tiger, and then the bump that takes place 2 years after in the year of the dragon. And we do see that phenomenon occurring every 12 years in Singapore as well. So that's something that kind of catches an attention for me when I'm looking at these trends over time. So if you want to know more about aging in Singapore per se, I think you're welcome to read our paper, which was published in the Gerontologist in 2019, that provides an excellent overview of the demographic policy and research scenario around aging in Singapore. And if you have read the paper or you read the paper, one of the studies that you would find highlighted is phase. And that's what I'll be talking about, say, over the next 5 minutes or so. So again, the reason why we wanted to start this study, and this was started way back in 2009, is that before this, there wasn't any longitudinal survey of older people in Singapore. There were a few cross-sectional surveys that had been conducted by the ministry that was responsible for the health and well-being of older people in Singapore. But those were kind of, say, every 4 years or 6 years, and there hadn't been any longitudinal survey. And therefore, phase was initiated in 2009 with an aim to identify the patterns, determinants, and outcomes of physical, social, and psychological health cross-sectionally as well as longitudinally among community-dwelling Singapore citizens and permanent residents aged 60 years and older, with the ultimate goal to provide evidence for policymakers and practitioners working with and for older people in Singapore, so that the policies and practices and programs that are informed are actually based on rich, nationally representative cross-sectional and longitudinal data. How did we go around this? So of course, it was a panel study. So we had a longitudinal observational design. We had a random sample of around 8,400 individuals that was drawn from a national database, which was stratified by gender and ethnicity and age bands. And we did over sample individuals who were old, 75 years and above, as well as the minority ethnicities in Singapore, so as to have enough numbers to make estimates that were relevant to those subgroups of the population. The first wave was conducted in 2009. Out of the 8,400, there were a few invalid addresses because I guess the sampling frame was a bit dated or old. Therefore, when we went there, those people weren't living there or the houses were torn down by then. And then there was non-response. So we managed to interview around 5,000, nearly 5,000 older people in 2009. We went back to these same individuals in 2011 and 12, so a gap of around 2 years. And we interviewed around 3,000 of them. So around 62% of individuals who were interviewed in wave 1, with the rest either having died or they were alive but were not interviewed. And then we went back to these 3,103 people in 2015, so a gap of around 3.5 to 4 years, to interview them, and we got around 1,572 of them. And again, the loss to follow-up was for a variety of reasons. The interesting part is it's not only the survey data that has been captured in this study, but we've also matched the information of these individuals with mortality data. So the month and year of death is available, which can be shared with researchers who are interested in analyzing, let's say, predictors of mortality or calculating health expectancy and so forth. We also have been able to match using I guess the identification IDs, their healthcare and long-term care use administrative data. Unfortunately, that data resides within secure servers at the ministry, and though that cannot be shared, that has to be analyzed within secure data rooms, and that data cannot be taken out, and therefore we won't be able to share that if somebody is interested, unfortunately. And just to kind of the point of the 3 waves, of course, was different. I think over time, as new concepts in aging came up, and there was a shift in the focus in terms of policy interests, it was interesting that wave 1, although it had a lot of kind of common questions, there were kind of modules that were more specific to social isolation. Wave 2 had a lot more questions related to dementia, and wave 3 focused on frailty. So again, just kind of coming to that. So what data has been collected? So, I mean, as Prof. Cruz pointed to earlier, I think these are questions that you would usually find in a lot of kind of aging surveys. But also, I think one additional point I would like to make is Prof. Saito, that you will be hearing later, had been instrumental in designing and conduct of phase as well. And therefore, a lot of the questions are common across surveys that you would be hearing today, in the Japanese survey, in the Philippines survey, in the Singapore survey, as well as the Vietnam and the survey in Kerala. So that also offers an opportunity for researchers who are here today to think about cross-country studies or comparative studies. So we did collect data on socio-demographics, physical health. A lot of questions were asked in all the waves, but some questions, say for example, physical frailty was asked only in wave 3. So I've just pointed that out. Then we had questions on psychological health, social health, health behaviors. Anthropometric and performance measurements, as Prof. Cruz mentioned, in the Philippines were also taken in Singapore. So we had things ranging from blood pressure to hand grip strength, chair stand test, and time walk test. And people who died in waves 2 and 3, by waves in 2 and 3, their next of kin who were willing to fill in a questionnaire were asked a decedent questionnaire to assess the end of life experience of people who had passed away. Just some basic statistics from the first wave of the phase. I won't read through each of them. Maybe you can have a quick look, but we had a good distribution of age, more females than males, as you would expect in a cohort that's exclusive to older people. Singapore had the majority ethnicity is Chinese, and that's reflected in the distribution of the ethnicity. Interestingly, even though Singapore now is a developed country where most younger people, nearly all, are educated and can speak English, it is important to realize that the current cohort of older people still has a preponderance of older people who just have primary education or no education at all. I apologize for the typo there, the no ADL limitations should be 93.7. So they were 90, but they were around kind of 7% of people who had at least one ADL limitation and around 13% who had at least one IADL limitation. Around 1 in 5 had 3 or more chronic health conditions, and 15% had clinically relevant depressive symptoms, and around 1 in 5 also reported that they mostly felt lonely. Of course, these are only some statistics from phase, and for those who are interested more, I'll be happy to share more information. But just to kind of highlight that, as in the Philippines and Singapore, the data has also been used extensively. Have had academic outputs in the terms of publications, presentations. It has contributed to policy and practice. It has been used for projection models by the ministry, which have informed policies such as long-term care insurance scheme in Singapore. It has, in the last wave, we tested out whether people understood bilingual labels better than English only labels, given the language mix in Singapore. And we found that, yes, they did. And that has resulted in the introduction of bilingual medication labels in the public healthcare system in Singapore. From a clinical perspective, we have also developed frailty measures as well as normative values of anthropometric measurements such as hand grip strength. The data has also been shared with international collaborations or consortiums, such as the NCD risk factor collaboration and the WHO consortium and metrics for healthy aging. And therefore, this enables kind of multi-country studies as well as a comparison of study of situation of older people across countries. And finally, I guess the phase study has also provided pilot of formative data or the sample for further funded grants or projects. And some of these include the science study, which is a new cohort of older people that we are doing, studies on caregiving and studies on medication labels. For those of you who are interested to know more about kind of the content, the design, what kind of papers have been published, of course, feel free to contact me. But this paper that we published in the International Journal of Epidemiology in 2019 provides an excellent overview of the design of the study and the content. So I would encourage you to do that. It's available for free online and the link is provided. In terms of, I guess, my last kind of content is more about the phase data. It is available for sharing with researchers and academic researchers, policymakers who are interested in using the data for their own work. And of course, but the data sharing, I think in Singapore, I think we have to jump through a few more hoops compared to maybe countries and settings where data sharing is much more common, and it would be subject to some approvals. But this web link provides much more details on how the data sharing can happen. And I'll just briefly run through it. So, and that's kind of the steps that are available on the website.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, somebody saying something. Okay. So again, I think we have the entire dataset codebook and a data request form available on the website. If you click on those highlighted kind of orange links when you go on the actual website, you can download those. Once you have gone through those, please fill in the completed data request form and send to an email that's also provided on the website. At that point, there may be some back and forth with you as our data request team kind of asks more questions or clarifications. Do note that if you're a student who wants to access the data, we directly don't provide the student the data, but we provide it to the supervisor of the student. Since there has to be a person responsible at the institution we are sharing data with to take responsibility of data security and make sure it's not misused. Once that happens, we would inform you. We would take approvals internally for the sharing. And once that happens, we would ask you to take approval from your IRB or ethics board for analysis of the de-identified survey data from phase. And if you require a supporting letter for that phase, feel free to ask us. We'll provide you a supporting letter that we are willing to share the data with you once you get the IRB approval. Once that is approved, please share the approval with us as well as the protocol that you submitted for approval. And there is a non-negotiable letter of undertaking for phase, which lists various kind of, I guess, conditions that you would have to agree to before we can share the data with you. Once all step 1 to 5 are over, we can send the data set to you in person if you're in Singapore, or we can send you via a secure cloud-based link. So, I mean, for those who are interested, do visit this website to get to know more about phase, the code book, as well as how to access the data. I mean, that's my last slide. I would like to acknowledge the principal investigators for the various waves of phase, the co-investigators, as well as the funding. For any more questions, do feel free to write to me or visit our website or the CARE email address. So that's it from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for Rahul's sharing. It is really exciting to learn again that Singapore has built on the one data set. It has already drived to work out other data and also the further studies, in particular on caregivers, on drugs, and on other aging-related issues.